Police Chief Tom Colby requested a grand jury on or about March 12, 1998. The grand jurors and alternates were selected on or about April 22, 1998. Mike Cain was chosen lead prosecutor on or about May 5, 1998. The grand jury was announced on or about August 12, 1998, and the secret proceeding commenced on or about September 15, 1998, and generally it took place 2 days a week, most of the time on Tuesday and Thursday. And it's a secret proceeding, so no one outside really knows what took place inside. But this video is going to suppose what happened inside, and obviously we will not cover the whole grand jury proceeding. We will only focus on a few witnesses, and I will put up on the screen every once in a while the date. So you have been served. You've crossed through the metal detector where your constitutional rights have been violated to be secure in your person and your belongings, and you sit and wait for the judge to start on time. Boulder County Judge Roxanne Balin was in charge of this grand jury proceeding, and the lead prosecutor was Mike Cain, and he had 2 assistants. The first assistant was Mitch Morrissey, and his second assistant was Bruce Loving. And then the grand jury members that were selected for this months in advance were first James, the foreman of the jury, and then Loretta, who was the assistant forewoman, and then there was Elizabeth, Michelle, Frances, Josephine, Martin, Susan, Barbara, Martin, Tracy, and Jonathan. Your Honor, may I proceed? Are we ready to go? Certainly, Mr. Cain, you may proceed. So first, what I thought I would do, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, or of the grand jury, I would introduce you to the Ramsey family. So there is John Ramsey, age 53, Patsy, age 39, Burke, age 9, and JonBenet, age 6. And they lived at 755 15th Street. John was president of Axis Graphics with over 300 employees. Patsy was a stay-at-home mother who volunteered at her son's school. Burke attended 4th grade at High Peaks, a new charter school, and JonBenet had just started kindergarten at High Peaks. The Ramsey family had a housekeeper, Linda Hoffman, who lived in Lupton, Colorado, and they had several family friends, Fleet and Priscilla White, with their children Daphne and Little Fleet, John and Barbara Fernie, with their children, and Glenn and Susan Stein, with their children. John Ramsey was previously married. He had 3 older children. His oldest child, Elizabeth, died in a car crash in 1992. Melinda graduated from nursing school and was working in Atlanta and had a boyfriend, Stuart, that she eventually married. And then John's oldest son, John Andrew, was a sophomore at the University of Colorado, Boulder. Also a part of the Ramsey family was Don and Nidra Paul, Patsy's parents, and they lived in the Atlanta area. But Don spent a great deal of time in Boulder, working for Access Graphics. Okay, next, members of the grand jury, we are going to have Sergeant Tom Wickman briefly describe the crime to you. So, Tom? On December 26th, 1996, the day after Christmas, Patsy called 911 at 5:52 a.m. She reported that she found a ransom note and that her 6-year-old daughter was missing. Police arrived and searched inside and outside of their house for clues. Patsy said that she last saw her daughter in bed around 10 p.m. Christmas night. The ransom note was addressed to Mr. Ramsey and stated, "I will call you between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow to instruct you on delivery." Several calls came in that morning, but no one called about the ransom. At approximately 1 p.m., Detective Linda Arndt suggested that John Ramsey and his 2 friends look around to see if anything looked out of place. Shortly thereafter, John found his dead daughter's body in a storage room in the basement. She had black duct tape on her mouth and was wrapped in a white blanket. JonBenet had been sexually assaulted, strangled with a nylon cord, and struck in the head with some kind of solid object. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I want to bring to your attention this timeline of that morning. So Officer French arrived at 5:59. He was the first one there. Then Sergeant Rickenbach was there at 6:05, and Officer Veach was there sometime between 6 and 6:10. And then the first friend of the Ramseys, John Fernie, arrived at the back door at 6:10, maybe 6:15, because at that same moment in time, Fleet and Priscilla White arrived at the Ramseys' front door about 6:15 a.m. Then Officer Weiss arrived at 6:45, and Officer Barklow. Weiss was taking photographs of the crime scene, and Barklow was fingerprinting. Barbara Fernie arrived sometime between 6:30 and 6:50 a.m., and then the 2 victim advocates arrived at 6:45. Then Reverend Roll arrived at 7:13. And then Fleet and Burke left at 7:15. Sunrise was at 7:20, and then Detective Arndt and Patterson arrived at 8:10 a.m. Officer French, would you tell us how this incident began for you?
On a report of a possible kidnapping, upon arrival, I met with a distraught Patsy Ramsey and her husband, John. John advised me that their 6-year-old daughter, JonBenet, was missing, and that their 9-year-old son, Burke, was asleep upstairs. John directed me through the house and pointed out a 3-page handwritten note which was laid on the wooden floor just west of the kitchen area. He told me that his wife had found the note on the bottom step of a spiral staircase which led to the upper levels of the house. The note advised the Ramseys that their daughter was in the possession of a group of suspects and demanded a ransom of $118,000 to be delivered by means detailed to them later. I spoke with Mr. and Ms. Ramsey while Burke continued to sleep. Ms. Ramsey told me that she had gone into JonBenet's room at about 545 hours to wake her in preparation for a short trip the family was to later take that day. She found JonBenet's room empty and then discovered the note as she walked down the stairs. She immediately called the police.
Would you please tell us what John and Patsy said about the night before?
They arrived home at 2200 hours. Mr. Ramsey said he read to both kids for a short time, and then they were in bed by 22:30 hours. Ms. Ramsey said that JonBenet had been dressed in white long underwear and a red turtleneck.
Tell us about JonBenet's bedroom that morning.
JonBenet's bedroom has an access door to a second-floor porch. which was locked and undamaged.
Linda Arndt, what did John Ramsey tell you about the night of December 25th? John Ramsey told me that he and his family had been at a dinner party held at the Whites' home on the afternoon and evening of December 25th. John, Patsy, Burke, and JonBenet had returned home at approximately 10. John told me that Patsy and Burke immediately went to bed. John had read a book to JonBenet, tucked her into bed, then John went to bed. John said he went to bed at approximately 10:30 p.m. What did John Ramsey say about the doors and windows? I had asked John if the doors to the house had all been locked when the family went to bed last night. John told me that he personally checked all of the doors and all of the windows in the home this morning. All of the doors and windows were locked. John told me that although the house does have an alarm system, the family had not used the alarm system for months. Detective Arndt, can you tell us what happened to the ransom note? Officer Veach informed me that he had the ransom note which had been left by the reported kidnappers. I requested that Officer Veach make 3 copies of this note. This request was carried out. I retained possession of one of the copies of the note. Another copy was given to Detective Patterson, and the 3rd copy was placed in a sealed envelope and left on my desk. I quickly reviewed the contents of the 3-page note. Do you recall what Patsy Ramsey was wearing that morning? Patsy Ramsey had been wearing black pants and a red turtleneck sweater when I had last seen her. Sergeant Reckenbach, what did you observe when you arrived at the Ramsey residence? There was a light dusting of snow on the ground when I arrived at the Ramsey residence. I did not notice any footprints or other tracks in the snow. I personally checked the exterior of the Ramsey residence. I did not notice any signs of forced entry to the residence. Sergeant Whitson, what does it state in your police report about that morning? I was advised that Officer Barry Weiss had already photographed the house and didn't find any signs of an obvious crime scene where there had been a struggle. I was also told there was no signs of forced entry and there were no footprints of possible suspects found outside of the home. Sergeant Whitson, can you tell us about the 2 notepads? I asked Mr. Ramsey for a sample of his and his wife's handwriting, just as standard procedure. Mr. Ramsey gave 2 notepads to Detective Patterson, who in turn gave them to me. I was advised one of the pads was for Mr. Ramsey and the other was a sample of Mrs. Ramsey's handwriting. Officer Ubowski, can you tell us about the notepad that had written on the top sample of Patsy's handwriting? By comparing tear patterns in the notepad, I had determined that the first 12 pages were missing. The next 4 were lists and miscellaneous writings. The next group of pages were missing. The following page was the practice ransom note with the Mr. and Mrs. Comparing the ragged tops of the ransom note pages with the edges left of the notepad proved that the next 3 pages were of the ransom note. Officer Ubowski, can you tell us about the ransom note and what you learned about the ransom note? The ransom note was from the white legal pad that belonged to the Ramseys. The Sharpie pen used to write the note was from the Ramseys, and there were 5 fingerprints that belonged to Patsy Ramsey on the notepad. And comparing Patsy's writing with the ransom note, 24 of the alphabet's 26 letters looked as if they had been written by Patsy Ramsey. Dr. Meyer, I'm going to ask you some questions about your autopsy report. So first, what was the decedent wearing when you found her?
The decedent is clothed in a long-sleeved with knit collarless shirt, the mid-anterior chest area of which contains an embroidered silver star decorated with silver sequins. Tied loosely around the right wrist, overlying the sleeve of the shirt is a white cord. There are no defects noted in the shirt, but the upper anterior right sleeve contains a dried brown tan stain measuring 2.5 by 1.5 inches, consistent with mucus from the nose or mouth. There are long white underwear with an elastic waistband containing a red and blue stripe. The long underwear are urine-stained anteriorly. Beneath the long underwear are white panties with printed rosebuds and the words Wednesday on the elastic waistband. The underwear is urine-stained, and in the inner aspect of the crotch are several red areas of staining measuring up to 0.5-inch maximum dimension.
Dr. Meyer, can you tell us the contents of the small intestine? The proximal portion of the small intestine contains fragmented pieces of yellow to light green, tan, apparent vegetable or fruit material, which may represent fragments of pineapple. No hemorrhage is identified. Dr. Meyer, would you tell us about the vaginal mucosa? Dr. Meyer said all of the sections contained vascular congestion and chronic inflammation, and he read the rest of what was here in the autopsy report. Mr. Morrissey asked more questions of Dr. Meyer in front of the grand jury about the injuries to JonBenet's body and the condition of JonBenet's body at the time of the autopsy, and this information is provided here. The grand jurors examined the Ramsey residence on October 29, 1998. The house was now unfurnished, and they viewed the house for more than 2 hours. Well, this ends this episode of Unsolved, and this is a two-parter. So part 2 will be next weekend, where we'll hear more testimony from John and Patsy's friends, from Lou Smith, and others, as they build a case against John and Patsy, and we will learn the verdict of the grand jury. So see you next weekend.